And we are live.
Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. It's July 13th, 2021. Hi, Rob Grant. What's the name of your show?
I'm probably wrong about everything.
I
Thanks for
doubt
being
that.
on.
Yeah, I doubt that. I think I'm probably nightlife instrumental about everything today. So hopefully, our dear friend Corey Dancero will join us soon. And if not, we'll get along. One thing I want to recommend everybody is always have a copy of Finnegan's Wake aside. This is the this is the manual for how to live. And the word live is what you do, Rob, so well. You know how to live, dude. And I appreciate you letting me hijack your show or share it time with you, as you would say. And,
Yes.
James Joyce wrote a book called Portrait of the Podcaster as an Artist. And here's the quote: "Welcome, O life. I go to encounter for the millionth time the reality of experience and to forge in the smithy of my soul the uncreated conscious of my race." Now, you might not know what that means. I don't, but I like to probe it and figure out what this great artist, this great writer who sometimes claimed to have written the most important book on the face of the earth called Ulysses, came out in 1922. And then from 22 to 39, he wrote Finnegan's Wake. So the first three words are simple. Rob, welcome, O life. So he is addressing life as an entity. He's addressing, oh, welcome, O life, like your friend comes to the door. Oh,
It's a
welcome.
tangible thing.
You
Yeah.
don't even have to say it's tangible. You could say I welcome whatever. It's sort of like tangible, but he's also anthropomorphizing
Yeah.
a word. So
Personification.
he's personification of life.
Yeah.
So what is life, Rob?
Oh man, life. You know what? I started reading this book, Taoism. Tao. Have you
Yeah.
ever heard of it?
Yeah.
And it's pretty much like a WTF is anything kind of book. It's like, you know, in the 5,000 pages or 5,000 words, excuse me, that is the Tao. That's it, 5,000 words. It says that the true Tao can never be expressed. Yet it goes on to tell you what Tao is in 5,000 words, which I think is quite ironic, right? And it's saying how, you need to be like water and all these things. And people have scratched their heads for the last 3 millennia trying to understand what is the Tao. And it's something like, what is life? Well, can we ever explain or express what life is? Can we ever summarize what it is? I just think that, life is just something that we experience. And there's moments when I absolutely love it. I'm, you know, enlivened by life, if that makes any sense. And there's moments when I'm like, whoa, man, life is life is a sleeping beast. And I don't want to shake it from its slumber. So, I mean, a very wise friend of mine, he said, whenever something would happen, he would say, well, life is life. And it's like, what does that mean? And therein lies the answer. Life is life. It's almost like, what's that book written by, and he's traveling back and forth, Slaughterhouse-Five. Whenever somebody dies, he says, so the story goes. I think that's the book. Milton
Yeah.
Brad. No.
Slaughterhouse-Five is Kurt Vonnegut.
Kurt. Yeah.
He's putting it in the narrative sense. So the story goes.
Yeah.
So he's making life comparable to telling a story. Well, let me tell you one thing about life that's funny. So the word is Old English. It means animated corporeal existence, the period between birth and death, the history of an individual from birth to death, written account of a person's life, a way of life, condition of being a living thing, the opposite of death. So it goes on for 4 paragraphs in Etymology Online explaining where the word came from. It means body, and then it goes into the verb live to live, to live, and it means to continue, to remain, term of duration or existence, vitality, energy in action, expression. So, I mean, there's a lot going on there. But, when Joyce says, "Welcome, O life," I go to encounter for the millionth time the reality of experience. So, what do you think is experience in regards to life? He's calling it, I'm going to encounter for the millionth time. So he puts it in the time frame that all you do is encounter the reality of experience. What is it? What do you think? I'm not saying you should know, but what's your hunch? How do you translate the reality of experience?
How do I translate the reality of experience? Well, let's dissect it. Let's
Yeah.
ask ourselves, what is experience? And I
Yeah.
think experience is, again, this kind of taps into things like the Tao and Buddhism and even classical Christianity and all. It's really when you're in the moment. And there's something about, there's even that author, I don't mean to snap my fingers at you, sorry, but he wrote the book on the flow state. And it's when you're doing something and you're absolutely present, which I think is kind of an interesting way of stating it, but you're absolutely present. And I think that we can be, there's an album, an amazing album by this band called Kill Switch Engage. And the album title is Alive or Just Breathing. And it brings into question, are we alive or are we just breathing? Are we present or are we just fake it? Are we in some catatonic state, moving from point A to point B? Or are we like smelling the flowers and you're like, oh, that one stinks, I shouldn't have smelled that one. Oh, that's a nice one, right? Are we in the moment? And I've mentioned before that sometimes, not always, but when I'm with my daughter and I'm really like in that moment with her, that is such a cool moment. But then we're pulled back into the things that I choose to allow myself to be distracted by. And I do think that I'm still experiencing, but the level of experience it's almost like it's diluted.
Yeah.
It's like, I just read Alex Trebek's autobiography, and it was written after he knew that he's like, okay, this is it, I'm going to die. And he's reflecting on his life. And he's like, at one point, he's just like, oh man, all I ever was a game show host of Jeopardy. It kind of alludes to that. But then he gets all these cards in from all these people all over the world saying, dude, you taught me how to speak English. I would sit on my grandfather's lap and watch your show. And then that's how I learned English. And this is a contestant that was on the show. And then he realized, oh my God, I have impacted people's lives. And what he's kind of saying is that tapping this in is our lives are finite. So it's like, try to enjoy it. But at some point, it's like we take it for granted until maybe at the end, or in the case of Alex Trebek, he was just like, damn, man, I had a wonderful life. And all these people he influenced. It's a beautiful book. It's called The Answer Is. I was reading it or listening to it as I was working. I picked up a summer job as a contractor, and I'm working in this warehouse with all these like big buff guys. And I'm like having ugly tears. I'm like, oh man, I got to pull myself together, because he's telling his story, and it's just beautiful because he's saying what his meaning of life is. He's not saying what your meaning of life is or our collective meaning of life is. He's just, like you say, he's giving it his best shot right before he passes from whatever this is into whatever comes after.
It's really well put. That's poetic, dude. You're really good with words, because to go back, Rob, you said something that Ram Dass wrote an important book in the 60s called Be Here Now. And it's like being present in the moment is a very hard thing. And it's beautiful because your daughter can help you enable that. that, you're not worrying. Like my yoga teacher always says, or my dance teacher, she says, get rid of your monkey brain. Like, don't worry about your dishes or eating or buying food or anything. Let go of all that and just be in the moment and move your body and be aware of your body movement, and be aware of your breathing. That's a hard thing to do.
What if I'm going to eat the devil's avocado here, but what if what you're doing is the monkey's brain?
Yeah.
When you stop worrying about the dishes and the taxes and all the things that don't matter at the end of this life, what if you're really tapping into that primordial, I don't even know if that's the right usage of the word, but the essence. What if you're tapping into the Tao and what it really is, the undefined, but you're defining it in your experience?
Yeah. No, that's the whole flip of it, that no matter what we do with words, it doesn't mean that you have to let the words define what you're doing. If you're saying, I'm going to be here now by being present with Rob, by just exchanging eye contact and verbiage, then that is, we are both being here right now. But we're like, okay, let's not think about what we're saying. What's going to come out of my mouth next? Don't think about it. Just let it flow. And, you're good at this. In having done several shows with you on this, you create an environment where people can feel free to be here now. But this is like another friend of mine I want to have on here, Jay, he's really good at defining that, because that's like, okay, we're going to meditate now. Now think about not thinking about anything. And he says, no, that sounds ridiculous. That's what they tell you in meditation class. Don't think about anything. Okay, I'm thinking about not thinking about anything. That's not a bad thing. You just focus on one thing and you try to let that gaze be free of clutter, and you're not thinking about other things or piling on. I think I might have brought this up before, but TSA is called tactile situation awareness. And if you're an airplane pilot in military and your plane gets bombed, you have to do something. You're going to die. Your plane's going to go down, or you're going to jump out of your plane. You've got all these decisions to make. So even though you can look at all the gauges on your plane and try to strategize, you can't identify with one of them. So when you're driving a car, you're often on automatic pilot. You can drive from here to there.
Catatonic.
It's catatonic, but you actually are, your monkey brain is working, and your physical brain and your thinking process is working, but you're also letting your mind be distracted with sort of a calmness that the activity puts you in. So it is possible. And my friend taught me that's what millennials and people who are on their cell phones and they're listening to a podcast and they're eating and they're hiring an Uber and they're on a scooter all at once, that's what there are. TSA, the tactile situation awareness. They're not identifying with one of them. They're letting them all engage and juggle it. So it's not we think, oh, that's horrible. But, I talked to this other modern thinker the other day and I said, is it literally possible to multitask? Now, what would you say to that?
Well, I can speak from A, experience, and B, the research that I know, but I cannot multitask. You just ask Jen. She is like, no, you are not good at multitasking. And I'm like, that's interesting. Good at multitasking. Now, because we have 100% of our attention span, right? So if I'm cooking, cleaning, and watching my daughter, I have to divide that percentage of my attention to each thing. So probably about 10% of it is going to go into cleaning, 30% of it is going to go into cooking, and the rest is 60% is going to go into my daughter. But the reality is that it's actually all affected. I'm not really, it's like the jack of all trades, the master of none, they say. But I do kind of think that you could be the jack of all trades and be the master of one life, but at different times. It's all about, to me, it's about attention and where we give our attention. And I do think that, I think if I use the word crisis, there's obvious attachment there, there's value attachment there, but I do think that we're living in a period of increased distractibility. That's certainly in my life.
Yeah.
You know, there are distractions aplenty. I don't know. I don't know if.
Well, I agree. But I also feel that since the beginning of time, when humans first engaged, we've always been distracted, and it's just different degrees. And we'll go, oh, now everything's sped up and we live in a speed. There's all kinds of data and information, and it's how you cope with it. And so to say, oh, it was a lot simpler in the old days is fine. You can say that. But what does it do in the long run? It's how are we going to cope in the present day? You know, the internet of everything. You know, I often say that this book, reading it out loud with a group of people, Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce, is he discovered what's going to be after the internet and disguised it as a book. So it's engaging people in a thing that they know what to do. When you read a book, you open pages and your eyes look at black ink on white paper, and then you translate the words from the author into your own mind, and you think, oh, I'm telling a story. There's a narrative. I'm learning something. And you're a book reader. And what I like, Rob, about you is that you actually reference books, you know, and you could reference life experiences, and you do that too. But to reference books is important. They've been around a long time, and they're in a valuable way for humans to learn and express themselves. So it is, you know, something that we can do as a group. That's the one thing you don't normally do with a book. You don't share it, and as you're reading it with a group of people, you read it individually, and then you might discuss it. Oh, I read that book, I can talk about it. But to share the experience of reading it out loud with a group is shifting the book experience, which is an eye experience, into an ear experience. So that's called sense ratio shifting. So everything we invent, you know, it really engages, usually one or two senses are more so engaged than other ones. You know, I always say books are important because I go into a used bookstore about 3 times a week. And the smell of a used bookstore is an important smell in my life. It's something, or I go to a library. You know, books have a certain smell. It's just like going into a bakery. It's half the experience is the smell, you know.
How would you describe the smell of like a used bookstore? Like for example, when it first rains
or whatever, like, you know, my bookstore guy is Rocco, and he's always like, you cannot, it doesn't matter how valuable the book is, if it has a little cat pee on it, you can't put it in the store because it will permeate. So it's a little musty because books are old and they usually sit on people's shelves for years. It's got that sort of musty smell. But here, just put your nose up there and smell that.
Yeah. Well, I can tell by the yellowing of the page. Like for example, I say to
the pages. Yeah.
But I say to kids, I'm like, because I used to be a teacher. So when it would first rain, I would say to kids, what does that smell like to you? And then they'd be
Good.
like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, when it first rains, there's a certain smell. And then the next, because I live in Vancouver, the wet coast, as we like to call it. They're like, yeah, we smelled it. We smelled it. And their parents were probably like, what the hell is this teacher telling them? They're like, but anyways, I said, what does that smell like to you? And then we all went around. And to me, it smells like gray. It just smells like if gray had a scent, that's what it would smell like.
You mean it smells? That's synesthesia. You're shifting.
Sure.
Yeah, it's synesthesia. You're saying it smelled a color.
Yes, but then I explain it as I think it's because this is my explanation, is that on the roads there's the oil and the dust and the dirt, and it kind of moves it up, and even the dirt in like planters and things like that, it kind of like moves it up, and that smell to me is like, it's like a musky kind of grayness. But synesthesia, I like that. I've never heard that word. So that means
like you hear colors,
like an onomatopoeia almost, but
right. But it's more like what color is the note C? Like some people hear a note and that resonates with a color, Yeah. So I mean, it's you can look it up, synesthesia, but it is an interesting thing how our five senses are engaged. Right now, I would say our eyes and our ears are more engaged than our smell and our touch,
Yes.
So,
well, easy. Yeah, right. I agree.
And so for years when we had, and this is a form of telephone, because we know that in 1939, the year this book came out, the New York World's Fair had demonstrations of video telephone. So that's what we have, a form of video telephone going on right now. You got StreamYard, it could be Zoom, whatever. And then in 1968 or 69, when Stanley Kubrick released a film called 2001: A Space Odyssey, you see one of the astronauts call his daughter on a Zoom call or a SteamYard call, just like this, on a television telephone, and wish her a happy birthday. And he's in a spaceship many miles from the Earth, and he's calling his daughter, and she sees him. Now, the phenomenon is, Rob, we've never met each other in person, but I feel we're friends. And, we've developed a relationship. So I'm curious, because I can say this from experience of doing events like this for 30 years, where I sit around and talk about things with people. I've found for the last year, due to COVID forcing me to do video online streaming, it's easier to just call it Zoom, is that my events are better. The people are more attentive. So why do you think that? I mean, you would think it's just the opposite. Oh, we got to get back in a room and all sit in a room around in chairs and be together and have real live experience, because we're back to that word experience.
Why do you think that it's better online?
Well, that I think it's better because the people are more attentive. Everybody's framed like this. If we're in a room, your eyes are wandering around the room. You're staring. We used to sit in this room where we would start about this time, 5 or 6 in the afternoon, and the sun's setting. So that light in the room was just captivating. And then eventually someone would flip the light switch on. And of course, everyone isn't staring like this. The frame isn't like that on everybody's face. We can see their entire bodies. We don't have to look at the body. We can look around the room or stare at our notes, or we're in Zoom, you're like more required to be more attentive. And thusly, I think the visual engages the participants in a more auditory attentiveness. They're more attentive, especially because people step over on each other. That's why in my Zooms, I say, raise your hand, so that half the meeting isn't like, oh, okay, you go first. Oh, no, you go first. Forget it. Just raise your hand. Let me call on you. Okay, you next, then you next. And, it has a flow to it. And I always say no chat and no share screen, because then your eyes shift, So, I mean, that's why I do. But again, it's back to that word experience. In fact, I was going to read a quote from Marshall McLuhan, who comes from Canada. And this is talk about experience. He's one step removed from America, just like you are. You're one step removed. You're not in America or an American. But is the culture really that different?
Oh, yeah. No,
Yes.
no, we are greatly affected by.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, overall culture, is it really that different? Is America, Canada that different? No.
I don't think it is.
Yeah, we're North Americans, we could say. We're just, Western culture. But here's the line McLuhan said, and we probably discussed this before, but it's a fun line to discuss, I think. And before I tell you what I think, you tell me what you think. It doesn't matter if it's what he intended. It's how you process these words. Everybody experiences far more than they understand. Yet, it is experience rather than understanding that influences behavior.
Do you mind saying that one more time?
No, I don't. I want people to try to suss it out. It's pretty simple, but there's a few parts. Everybody experiences far more than they understand.
Yeah.
Yet it is experience rather than understanding that influences behavior.
Oh, yeah.
So the second part, I wouldn't say both experience and understanding influences behavior. But he's saying, yet is it experience that influences behavior. Go ahead. You tell me what you think, because then I'll tell you what I think.
Well, I mean, this kind of ties in nicely to Simon Prentice and speech and communication and all that stuff. I mean, okay, so do you mind if I kind of get into a bit of a story?
Oh, that's what it's all about. Anecdotes and stories is
okay.
How we
So I think that this was I wish I would have taken time to sit down and write after this happened. But about on Thursday, I was painting, and I had to charge my headphones or whatever, and I was just kind of sitting there. Now, where I am working is kind of this rural area, and these roads that just kind of go on forever. There's no lights, and there's not much traffic. There's stop signs, and people just sometimes barrel right through them. So I'm sitting down, and all of a sudden I hear this just massive crash, bang, boom, and this steering wheel. And it's a sound like not of an irate person honking the steering wheel, but like a head resting on a steering wheel or something. And again, this is what I'm saying is I hear this experience, and now in my mind, I'm like, okay, what's going on here, right? So I walk out onto the street, and I walk out, and as I can see, as I cross over the threshold of this fence, not knowing what I'm going to see, in my mind, I'm like, okay, a car got hit, 2 cars collided. And then I step out and I see one car, one big truck in the ditch. And I'm like, okay, so the car, again, as I'm seeing in my mind, I'm communicating what has happened. Okay, so the truck drove into the ditch, and all these people are out, and they're all like, like, whoa, how did this happen? I'm like, okay, so everybody's fine. They're just trying to figure out, like, they're trying to get their truck out of the ditch or whatever. Now, this thing was like a flatbed trailer that had like goosenecked. And then as I'm walking, I'm seeing other cars sort of stop by, and there's more panic and people running around. And I'm like, okay, all right, maybe somebody's stuck in the truck. So as I'm walking there, somebody says, man, there's somebody stuck in that car. There's somebody stuck in the car. And I'm like, somebody's stuck in a car. And then I look at the truck, and beside the truck, there's a vehicle, an SUV that's been pulverized, crushed. Now, where I'm working, I just mentioned earlier that I had to hide my tears because I didn't want to be made fun of all these, industry, these macho guys or whatever, they're tradespeople. And I see one of the people that I've talked to quite a bit, and he's beside the vehicle, and he's very panicked. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this guy was in that car. So there's two vehicles, right? And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, he was in the car. And he's like, dude, like talking to me. I'm like, Bryce, because he's all elevated. I'm like, Bryce, that's the guy's name. Is everything all right? And he's like, man, there's somebody stuck in the car. And I look at the car, and in the back seat, there's a guy, and I could see his arm sticking out. And in my mind, I'm like, Jesus, like that's one of the guys from the shop. He was in the car, and they've just been in a really bad accident. I'm like, Bryce, who's in the car? And he's like, I don't know. And I'm like, okay, so they weren't riding together, right? So what I'm getting at here is I'm figuring out what has happened as I'm experiencing this. And then the reality is that I don't really know what had happened. I'm just sussing it out. And what's even better is, so after the paramedics come and they, they have to get because someone's like, we got to get him out of the vehicle. I'm like, nope, just leave him, right? We could kill this person if we try to take them out of the vehicle. Again, I don't know anything about this, but I'm just kind of saying like, hey, let's just wait, right? Like paramedics are some of my favorite people in the world because they're just really good guessers, right? They show up at the scene. They're like, okay, we need to do the anaphylactic leg up seizure, and hopefully they'll start breathing again. It works about 75% of the time. And if not, we'll give them a shock. And it's like, like they're just educated guessers.
Yeah.
So anyways, so I'm thinking that this guy was a passenger in the back seat who's now encased in a car. But what had actually happened is he was driving about $140, got hit by a truck because he blew the stop sign. And he was the only person in the vehicle. He's a passenger, and he was ejected into the back seat. Right. So here I am. I'm like, okay, I understand. And here's the part about human society that kind of frustrated me as I'm trying to help people. And then the paramedics come. I'm like, okay, now I'm just in the way. So I go back. What do? I go back to painting because it's like, well, I guess I'm just going to paint. But meanwhile, all these people have clamored out of nowhere. We're on like a rural road. There's like 20 people now all of a sudden. Like, I don't know where these people came from. Like, they're like trolls or something. They're like, I got to get a look at this. So they're all looking around. Oh my God, like snapping pictures and stuff. And then as I get back, I go back to painting. And then this house that I'm painting at, there's also a house on a property. This woman comes up for the first time. I had never seen her before. She's like, hey, did you hear that accident? Right. So we're all kind of like coming together. And she's like, yeah, I heard it was a stolen car. And all these stories start to circulate. And the reality is nobody knows WTF happened. Right. So the person's like, he had a wife and kids and blah, 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 and all this stuff. And it's like, all that we know is that this person died because they did. They died like half an hour after this all happened. And it taught me so much about the human experience because everybody wanted to see what had happened, but they weren't really doing anything. They were just really weird, like almost, what's that word for somebody who's like watching a peep show? Voyeuristic. Yeah. They were all, it was very like, it was kind of perturbing almost that everybody's like, oh, but they're trying to get a sense of what had just happened is life had come and had gone. Yeah. And that is just not usual. And that it was bringing us together and we're all sharing our, like, oh, he was on drugs and, all this. And we're creating these stories because we're trying to create an understanding from this experience. But the truth is nobody knows, pardon my language, nobody knows what the fuck was going on in that guy's head.
Yeah,
when he blew the stop sign.
The whole picture, but you really explained it well because what we do is we have experiences, but there's something probably innate in us to figure out the
yes,
which is the understanding. So that's
Yes.
the thing that McLuhan's sort of saying, is that you can have experience, and that's what usually shapes our behavior, when understanding should be shaping our behavior. So in essence, you were saying, well, they're looky-loos and they're like all this, but they're just experiencing the fact that they're alive, he might be dead, and not to make a value judgment that they're doing it better or worse than you. But you were saying, well, let's suss out this situation bigger, because maybe there's something we can do rather than just stare and gawk. That we could, there, like you said, what should we do? Don't touch them, because the medics will probably know more, and they'll be here, short
But
amount of time.
but even in that, and you're right about the value judgment, but that's just the way it is, man. Like when I'm driving on the street and I see sirens, I'm always like, I can't not look. And
Of
I think
course.
that is innate, right? And you're right,
Yeah.
it is a value judgment. But to me, it was like,
But
I
that's
do think we got to clear out. Yeah.
we're probably more attracted to the experience. And that's
Mm.
probably what we can do, is consciously be aware that there's a big picture here going on. So how do we suss out the experience with understanding? I mean, the example, go ahead.
Well, there's actually another kind of interesting part to the story that
Please.
I thought I was having an acid trip. So, or an acid flashback. As I was painting, about an hour later, I hear this like a sound of a car hitting something. And I'm like, okay, now what's going on? And then Jen calls me, because where I'm working is at her work. Like she works there as well. That's how I got the job. She's like, sweetie, just be very careful when you're driving home. A lady just hit a deer. I'm like, what? So I get onto the street. I kind of, now I'm jogging. At first I was walking, but as a hunter, I'm like, okay, I want to make sure that this animal's okay, because it's just been hit by a vehicle, and make sure that the lady's okay, because if you hit a deer, it can come into the windshield. So I jog out there, and this lady is like really distraught. Jen's very smart. She just kept driving. She's like, I have a 22-month-old in the back. I'm getting out of here. Right. I'm getting out of here while I'm still alive.
Right.
Something's going on the street. So anyways, I get out there, and then there's this lady looking at this animal, and I'm like, are you okay? She's like, yeah, I'm fine. I don't know about my car. She's driving a Hummer. I look at her car. I'm like, there's not a scratch on it. I'm like, ma'am, I mean, you can go ahead and call the insurance company, but there's not a scratch on here. And then I go on to the other side, the driver's side, and the deer, when she had hit her, she'd hit the deer right in the stomach. So it shit all over the side of her vehicle. And I look at her, and I'm like, you might want to take it to a car wash. She's like, what do you mean? Oh my God. And anyways, this cop walks up, and he's like, dude, what is going on? Like, the cop is like, he's perplexed. Again, we're trying to understand this experience. Right. So he's like, hey, can you help me? Because I'm like, I'm a hunter and stuff. He's like, okay, let's drag it over here. So he drags it onto the side of the road. And I'm like, it might still be alive. He's like, you're right. Hold on. Okay, I'm going to put one in its chest. And he pulls his gun out, shoots a deer right there. And there's cars that are driving by, and they're like, ah, like hilarious. And I'm like trying to like help, move traffic. And then after all this happens, and we throw the deer in the ditch so that the people can come get it, but we can't leave it on the, on someone's driveway. I'm like, can I help with anything else? He's like, no, man, you've done more than enough. You just go back, do what you're doing, because otherwise you might get injured or anything. And I go back and I continue painting. And in my mind, I'm like, what just happened? And that's what it is. It's like, when we try to understand experiences, it's like, maybe everything is just completely random, and but the human mind wants to understand patterns. And that's why in Simon Prentice's episode, we talked about, if you want to stay young, seek out cognitive dissonance, seek out things that challenge your belief systems, because that's what and again, not a value statement, but I do think that's what media as in news, tries to clamor on, is to the things that validate preconceived notions in our minds, the schemas, when really I do think that there's just a lot of interrelated but unrelated, but all affecting each other at the same time, things that happen on a daily basis. That deer was probably freaked out by what happened by that accident, darted across the road, and then was hit by a car because that deer was elevated. But then again, these are two completely unrelated incidences, and here we are. It's almost like the human experience is, existence, not even the fact that we're here on this planet, the bacteria that we are, is so absurd that we're the perfect distance from the sun, that we've won this one in unfathomable number lottery that we're here. Is either it's like some people are like, well, it's God, it's all by plan, or maybe it's just a complete freak accident. But then that's us trying to understand the experience. And that's the Tao right there. It's like you're just going to try and understand it, but you demystify life when you attach words and meanings to things. Yet that's what we as artists do.
Yeah. No, that was really well put. And I loved your bringing in cognitive dissonance. But it's what you brought up there for a second was create the disease and offer the cure. Like, we are constantly doing that to ourselves. Actually Frank Zappa's great question. He didn't say, this is who the brain police are. He said, who are the brain police? Like, are they someone in your head, yourself, or is it some evil consumer culture that's telling you to buy stuff you don't need? Well, it's a little bit of both. So instead of saying it's one thing or another, he just said, who are the brain police? He said, what's more important is the question than the answer. Inventing new questions and inventing new metaphors and inventing new myths or reinventing the old myths is where it's at. That's what I think Simon was saying is seek out cognitive dissonance, figure out where things, did someone plan that out? I was just painting here, and then all of a sudden it was a speeding accident and then a deer accident, and I'm watching a cop kill a deer. Yikes,
Yeah.
This is like the decisions had to be made. But back to the McLuhan quote, I just wanted to suss out, because you have a child, this is the way I sometimes explain this. Everybody experiences far more than they understand, yet it is experience rather than understanding that influences behavior. So if your child comes in from the cold wintry day, and you've got the heater on or the stove on or a fireplace, you can say, don't touch the fire, it will burn your hands. That's experience. If you say, honey, let me teach you about the dynamics of heat. If you go real close to the fire and rub your fingers together, don't touch the fire, get close, you will learn that the heat will thaw your fingers out and you'll have warm hands. So I'm going to teach you how to shape the behavior by understanding the dynamics of heat, rather than saying, don't touch the fire, it will burn your hands. And that's a decision you have to make as parents. When do you say don't, rather than the hippy dippy way was, honey, let's play ball over here instead of falling down in the ditch over there. Don't do that. So give them alternatives. But sometimes you probably feel you have to say no, don't. Like, how do you process that as a dad? Have you studied parenting, or are you just going on your hunch, or how did you understand that parenting need?
Well, I mean, I mean, you could read every book in the world, right? But you know what I mean? Like until you're a parent, it's like
there's no instruction manual with your
baby. That's the old saying. And again, what you're talking about, pragmatism is like learn through doing, correct? That's pragmatism.
Yeah.
So there's pragmatic parenting, and then there's this, theoretical, mumbo jumbo stuff. And I think that it really does. So much of life to me is eclectic, right? It's like there's not just one way of doing it. It's so many ways. It's like with religion. Christianity is the one true religion. Don't you know that? It's like, well, then why have these other ones existed for thousands of years? Well, because they're not true. Well, could they not be saying that about you? I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
My point is as parents, and maybe even going back to the example of these experiences, right? So, and then how it influences behavior. So I witnessed all these things in the span of an hour and a half. And I'm asking myself, like, am I having an acid flashback? Like, what is going on here, right? But the behavior to me is a form of communication, and it can be a choice. It can be a choice. We might not always be aware that it's a choice, but my choice could be, I'm just going to become an agoraphobic. There is no way I'm stepping outside my house if I'm going to have to deal with this shit every day, right?
Yeah.
Or it's like, I am going to be a little bit more careful. So there's the influences of behavior there, I think, right? Is that those experiences, while I'm not able to understand them, they have made me realize, even in Jen's like, just be very careful when you're driving home. And everybody I talk to who works at that shop, they're like, hey man, yeah, just drive careful. The next day I drove into work cranking Kenny Loggins' Danger Zone. Because I was like, this is a dangerous road. It's a danger zone here, right? And again, I think that comedy, there's a thing called gallows humor. And I think that's like a prophylactic for life.
Yeah.
Because without humor, I always love ripping on Nietzsche and how he said, without music, life would be a mistake. Well, hey, Nietzsche, there's a lot of things that without it, life would be a mistake. And humor is one of them as well, right? Could you imagine if we were so serious that it's like, you have to make light out of existence. I think that that's a valuable thing.
It's a really good point. And it's funny because our guest didn't show up and we were going to talk about drugs. And you, about 3/4 of the way in, you started going acid flashback, not consciously going, well, we got to bring drugs in a little. So we could close out with this a little. Look at this is Michael Pollan in the New York Times this Sunday. How should we do drugs now? This guy is an amazing writer.
Oh, yeah.
Michael Pollan, you've read him or you're aware of him?
Yeah. He did a book on mental illness and drugs.
Is it good?
Amazing.
Yeah, because his book is This Is Your Mind on Plants. This is a huge article in the New York Times. I mean, massive. And he really raises a lot of questions. But the big question we just started with in our group was, why do humans take drugs? Why do we alter our state? And it's a hard question to word because Frank Zappa was anti-drug, but in essence, he was addicted to coffee and cigarettes because they're known as legal drugs. They weren't so much drugs. He would call them food.
He never did drugs?
No, he was anti-drug. Big
drugs.
Yeah. But he did cigarettes and coffee. Now, cigarettes are plants. Coffee's a coffee bean, but those were legal drugs. Now, cannabis or peyote mushrooms are also grown from the earth, but they shift all consciousness differently than coffee and cigarettes. Now, you watch Michael Pollan on Joe Rogan like a week ago, and he tried to stop coffee for 3 weeks. Michael did, and he talked about the experience. And we know that's an immense drug. Coffee is an immense drug. Tobacco is an immense drug. But someone along the way said, okay, these drugs are legal and these aren't. And so now they're making cannabis legal and they're making LSD legal. And so now what do we do? So, it's just a free for all. You're going to have guides. What are you going to do? So I'm just curious, your take that we in our group, we really came up with some amazing lines about
Have you heard of this book?
Chasing the Scream. No, tell me what it says.
Oh, it's unreal, man. It's about, well, it's approved by Elton John, so you know it's good. It's about the first and last days of the war on drugs by Johan Hari.
Yeah.
He's a South African guy, and he talks about how the war on drugs, it's closely related to discrimination and racism within the States.
Yeah.
And a brilliant book. I mean, guy's a brilliant journalist. And again, it's saying like, what have we gained from the war on drugs?
Yeah.
Well, it's to me, it's neo imperialism. The fact that we can go into these countries and tell them what to do. If you legalized drugs, see, there's a question that I asked when I was in my Latin American relations class, U.S. Latin American relations class in my undergrad. When I was a snotty-nosed, I was a teenager then. And we're looking at the drug trade and the U.S.'s involvement in the war on drugs. And I put my hand up and I said, but why do people do drugs? Why don't we look at that question? And the teacher said, I don't know. That's a good question. Let's move on, right? And then we moved on from it. But my camera's all blurry here. Hold on. There we go.
That's
wow.
Really good, because you got back to the root of my initial question on this topic shift, which was really not. It was an acid flashback for both of us. We're supposed to be talking about drugs.
Yeah.
I got my notes on Michael Pollan article exactly addressing that right off the bat, because there was a US government drug guy who came out years ago and said, you can't have a war on drugs because drugs can't fight. And he said, you can't say no to drugs because drugs don't talk. Yeah. So what he was saying sort of resonated with what Frank Zappa was saying. It's a war on hopelessness. That's why Frank said, well, that's why people take drugs, is they're hopeless. But it's much deeper than that. That's part of what Frank was insinuating. But it's also, why do humans seek out intoxicants? Is it something innate in humans to do that? So we will eat ice cream like a little more than we need. Is that rewarding our need and want to push this drug, which is sugar or taste?
Sugar is a drug. 100%.
Yeah, it's a drug. And so, let's ask you, Rob, why do humans take drugs? The very question you asked your teacher, I'm curious, because I'm going to tell you what, the 5 people in our group said, and it's an amazing span, but I would like to just get your feelings just off the top of your head, your hunch, your guess, your intuition. Why do humans take drugs?
I think there's multiple reasons. One of them is, but it all is around existence. Some is to numb the pressures of existence. Alcohol numbs us, right? It kind of shuts our minds down. It's also a social lubricant, right? So yes, to numb the pressures of existence, but to also elevate our consciousness and our existence.
Yeah.
And I think that the decriminalizing marijuana just makes sense to me.
Yeah.
It's like if alcohol is going to be legal, you might as well make marijuana legal. Hey, while you're at it, psilocybin mushrooms. While you're at that, why don't you do LSD? Hey, why stop there? But
it's a huge business, and then the capitalists are going to take over. And so, when they first made pot legal in Venice, California, years ago, they had a big opening at the pot shop, and I went in, and all these people behind the counter were in white smocks, and they looked like doctors and nurses. I said, they should be hippies with flannel shirts on.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? this isn't a word, but they pharmaceuticalized
Oh,
marijuana.
totally. That is a word. You did it. Yeah.
Like, but that's like, that is absurd to me.
Right. But
And that, go
that's
ahead.
what happens. We create business, we invent money. It's those things are going to happen. So it's how we're going to cope with them. But let's stay on that for a second, the why, because you covered a couple. Here's what Duncan said. Why do we do drugs is we want contrast, which I thought was really interesting. So yeah, we don't want just this straight line. We want, well, what's on the other side? Like you reek of curiosity. So you're always like, well, what if? So we want contrast is interesting. Penny said it really well, to step up a notch, to enchant, to explore the magical, be immersed. Um, Jim said amazing. He said it's called species memory. That if we lived as lizards years ago, we're trying to retrieve our memories from our being our past selves, like our past lives.
Mm-hmm.
And that again sounds mystical and hippie and all that, but it is possible. And then Matt said it great. He said, to make us conscious of the life around us, like to wake us up, to
Right.
get control over the relationship, our relationship with our world. And it's back to that word, to increase our understanding. We want to be attentive. I smoked pot for a little time in my life. I called it herbal knowledge. And then I stopped and I started calling it herbal ignorance. Now,
Hmm.
smoking a little weed can help people and it can cloud things up. So it's just how you process the experience. You know,
Do
you're
you like, I mean, you don't have to answer this, but do you dabble in any
I
like
don't really. I
weed
mean,
or
I've drank alcohol in my life, but I'm not an alcohol drinker, and I don't dabble at all. I mean, basically, I'm 68, and for 15 years, I smoked pot from like 74 to 84 ish. And that's
what
whatever.
what made you stop?
It's just sort of a natural flow for me. I just said, okay. And I've never had desire like, oh, why don't I try a little, and it doesn't interest me. It's fine for people who do. I've been in rooms where, you can't not get a little contact high because the room is so clouded. But, it's an interesting thing because your things were numb, social lubricant, and elevate. So, that's what Michael Pollan is doing is why do we take drugs? Now, the next question we did was, do animals overdo drug use like humans do? Or do they know to stop? So just again, not so much what you read, but your intuition. Like we know that cats will seek out catnip to get a little buzz, or elephants will eat these leaves, to get a little buzz. They know which plants will do it, but do they go as far as humans do and overdo it?
Yeah, like just some bum elephant, like, hey, do you got any spare apples? You know what I mean? Like just sitting
But
there
I'm just saying,
destitute. But think about that for a sec. Like vagabonds, and not just to be funny, but like today, I never thought that going to a grocery store would become the most depressing experience in my weekly routine. But anyways, there's a guy like begging outside, and it's like, that's like, are we the only animal that does that? That begs? I I think we are.
right.
I can't think of any other animal that would be like, my life is so fucked up. You know what I mean? Like,
Well, that's again was what I have an issue with is called anthropomorphizing uh,
yes.
human language onto animals. Because one animal might go, "Oh, I know where they harvested all the potatoes, and there's a whole bunch left." So is that begging? It's called scavenging. and we have words
So
for it.
so that's a scavenger. A homeless person is a
Well,
scavenger. I'm not disagreeing. I'm
it's
curious.
all depending on how, some people are not able to do what society demands of us, so they find ways to get
That's a
around
good
it.
point.
Now, there's that, like,
That's a good point.
Rob, this is a very simple example I always give. I would spend half my life waiting at the corner of Lincoln and Venice for the light to change on my bicycle. So I see a big picture view. I see a couple homeless people. I see a bunch of people in fancy cars. The homeless people usually have a smile on their face, and everybody in the cars are tense. What's wrong with this picture? I mean, they're all the normal society people, and they're all tensed out, and the other people are
Well,
sitting.
this is such a construct. The
Yeah,
way we live is a construct.
right. So I tend
agree.
to,
Yeah.
want to accept everybody as they are, but of course we want compassion, and we want to, take care of everybody. It's how humans take care of those who aren't in need, and who are not entitled. That's important, and we often avoid that. But here's the next question in regards to the. This is well worded by Michael Pollan, but it can be simplified. How will we fold these powerful substances into our society and our lives so as to minimize their risk and use them more constructively? Not, how would you process that question in regards to drugs? Because this is, a big issue he's tackling. How should we do drugs now? I mean, that is a funny question, but it's true. We know how we've done drugs like tobacco and coffee and alcohol, but now we have these others. What do you suggest? How do we, what he
Well,
says, how do we fold these substances into our society? That's basically what he's saying, and minimize their risk.
and what a deeply rich question. And I'm sorry I jump around all over the place. I mean, yeah,
No, that's
I've been told that I'm ADHD gone wild, which is
no,
hilarious.
it's all right. You
Yeah,
get
yeah.
along well, and tangents and stories and anecdotes are good. But I mean, just in general, how would you process that question?
I think that, well, it's like what's objective truth and what's subjective truth. So what is the intent in the user, right? Because some a lot of I don't know, I want to be careful with this, but I would say that most drug usage, it's like, is it only a problem when it's not social usage, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're all gonna go to the party, we're gonna get hammered, man. It's gonna be a great time. But if you're like, whoa, I just saw a deer die in a human being, I'm getting loaded on a Texas Mickey of Mr. Schnitzel's vodka, like the cheapest shit I can find, right? When is it a problem?
Yeah.
Right? And I think that that's a relative question. But it's like there's the social, there's set. Michael Pollan talks a lot about set and setting in drug usage. And maybe
how do you separate those two?
that's a great question. And I don't think I'm getting this right, but my understanding is setting is like the place and the people, sort of the time and things like that, and the set is where you're doing it. So and you do have to be able to answer those questions. It has to be the right set and setting. If I'm remembering that correctly from his book, How to Change Your Mind, that was the name of the book that he wrote, and it's all about how drugs can help change our minds.
Well, Rob,
And
you must have ESP, because that was the next note on my notes for this session was set and settings as brought up here. Tim Leary was the one who first talked about it. He wrote 33 books, and he's often demonized, but he's a smart psychologist, and he was sort of like the guru for LSD, but at the same time, he brought up set and setting.
Tune in and tune out.
Yeah, tune on, tune on, and turn. He got that from McLuhan.
I'm not surprised.
Turn on, tune in, and drop out. But here's the thing. Matt said it best. He says, set is the interior. It's your mind. It's your mindset. It's your attitude. Setting is the environment, the atmosphere. Because I was trying to
mindset. Yeah, fair enough.
Attitude. It's your attitude going in. That's your interior landscape.
He uses another really good word, and it's like, it's not just Dionysian revelry or something like that, meaning like, it's not just like, let's get hammered. It's like, let's go on a journey. We're going to take a heroic dose.
Yeah. Getting hammered versus journey. Yeah. And that's why Matt's a very intelligent guy. He said, we should have people like social workers or nurses or whatever you want to call them that guide people that are there to help you, and not just cops who patrol and say they're drug users, because that's the same thing with domestic violence. If we would have engaged more of social workers in settling and then cops just showing up and shooting people, it would probably have been a lot smarter approach.
Alex Trebek, I mean, here I am bringing him back. Yeah. Guy's a genius. I mean,
another Canadian, right? He's from Canada.
Oh, yeah. Well, don't you know the Canadians are the best in the world? I'm just kidding. That's a joke. I don't believe that. But anyways, he talked about how in society, when crisis happens, we're really good at coming together and healing, restorative. Yeah. We're good at restorative, but we're not very good as a society. And I think it's Canada. No, I don't think. I know it's Canada included. We're not very prophylactic. We're not preemptive in our approach. And I think that's
2 words to explain that further. What's preemptive?
Prophylactic means like, we instead of responding to a situation, we try to heal and understand the antecedent. What is going on before we get there. Right. And that talks into human behavior. It's like, for many of us, we don't just snap one day. There's things that build up along the way that get us to where we are. At least that's what neuroscience tells us. It's not like just one day, that's it. It's like things have been happening all along the way that have led us up to there. And maybe there's the powder keg moment where we finally snap, but there were all these things that were happening before. And that's why we need prophylactic measures. That's where that comes in. It's like being kind and compassionate, being able to have conversations, not shutting people down. Maybe that would have avoided having Trump. Yeah. Just as an example. I mean, but we weren't able to have these conversations before we needed to have these conversations.
Yeah.
And again, that's subjective, obviously. I'm not saying this is.
No, that was well put, because it is. The other great Canadian I study is McLuhan. His whole thing was about causality. What causes things? We think we can nail it, but there's always a bigger picture, and there's many layers. So you can attempt to understand it, but there's also deeper layers to what really causes stuff. And can you ever really get to the bottom line cause? We don't know.
And that's the experience and the understanding. Just like the guy who was in the car accident. What was going on before he decided to go $140 through a stop sign? It's not like it just happened. Do you see what I'm saying? Right? Like, but then after we try to ask ourselves, why did he do it? Well, he was a drug addict, and he was a this, and he was a that. And it's like, okay, great. We've answered our question. Now we can go on with our lives. But I don't trust oversimplifications. Yeah. And I have a hard time with confidence. People who are like, I am absolutely certain.
Yeah.
To me, it's like, absolutely certain. Well, why do you have to say absolutely?
Yeah. It comes from them. Yeah. It's the first aphorism I ever invented was, there's no absolutes except that there are no absolutes.
Yeah. There's two kinds of people in this world. People that believe there's two kinds of people and people who don't. Oh, right.
Well, you brought up a good word, journey. I'm going to check out now, Rob. This has been really fun, but I'll close with we're talking about drugs, and we've used the tools of spoken word and eye contact, and I'm really grateful always to spend this time with you. But McLuhan said that word is the most addicting and universal drug. You know, that we're addicted to words, and that there's so much more to that, but we have to suss out what words do to us. And, you know, our whole beginning of this was I'm probably nightlife instrumental about everything. You know, we're probably fill in the blank about everything. And, you know, it's like there's a gap is where the action is, where there's no word. Like it's still pending. Your show's still in flux. I'm probably
high on everything.
Very good. Thanks a lot, Rob. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay. Bye now.